So, hi everybody, we are finally going to learn ReactJs, and I'm pretty excited. I'm sure that you guys are more excited than I am. So, let's not waste any time and let's just move further, right? Now, what is React? Now, to be honest, React is a framework and it was created by none other than Facebook. Now, Facebook is popularly called as Meta. Right. And the reason why they created React was because they wanted earlier there was MVN framework from Java and so on so on. It was not really good. It was not really dynamic. So it was also not really something that would reduce the size of the code or deployment or make the website smarter, faster, and dynamic, right? So it was created by Facebook. But there are other frameworks as well. So popularly there are three frameworks. One would be just give me a second. One would be React, and then other one would be Angular, and then Vue. Now, Angular is popularly created by Google, and here we have Meta. And to be honest, there's one more company called as Airbnb, which is heavily contributing now, but they haven't created React but now. So it's an open source framework for us to work with our HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and other different files that we use for web development. Now, why should we learn React and probably not any other language? So probably if you look here, and this is the graph of the npm usages. Obviously, we use npm to install our dependencies. Like earlier, we were using Express. Now, obviously, for React also, we'll kind of use. Obviously, let's say if we are using Mern stack, right? So we are obviously using Node, and then in that case, we want external dependency to be installed. So we use npm. So if you look at these npm usages from the last 5 years, this is the graph of React, that the orange one. And here, if you look at Angular, this is really low in the blue one. And if you look at Vue.js, this is also kind of overlapping with Angular. And here they had a huge spike, which I researched. It was because they stopped supporting the previous version. So everybody who was using Vue had to npm install everything again. So you had a spike during this particular period. But more or less, to be honest, you can ignore this particular spike here and continue that the trend for other frameworks is not so good. Okay, and you can ignore the other text which I copy paste from here. Now, if you look at Google Trends as well, so if you look at React developer, Angular developer, and Vue developer, for example, if you're looking for jobs, that is what you would Google. So if you look here, there's also an upward trend here. And then Angular is kind of constant, and then Vue is also like constant. So if I'm to rank it based upon this, obviously I'll say React is first, Angular is second, and Vue is third. So obviously React as a framework is much more used in the market. It's very powerful, as you can see from the GIF that I've added here. Now, same thing. If you go by, to be honest, what surged on Google, you'll see that earlier Angular was Googled a little more, and then it's kind of on a downward trend, and then React is kind of on an upward trend here, right? So basically, this is also one good thing. Now, if you also look at the most wanted, this is Stack Overflow data, the most wanted framework. So most of these guys are going ahead with React and Node, and obviously TensorFlow is there, but TensorFlow is basically for data scientists. So yeah, now there are a few companies which kind of use Angular. There are a few companies which kind of use React. So if you look at Angular, which is used by Cisco, Upwork, Forbes, HBO, Capital One, Google, National Geographic, BMW, Sony. However, if you look at React, you have Dropbox, WhatsApp, Airbnb, Netflix, New York Times, Facebook, Instagram, Bloomberg. Then you have Uber, BBC. So if you look at all of this data, what will tell you is more complicated apps are created on React, and lesser complicated ones, apart from the obvious choice of being Google, are kind of created on Angular. So this is what I go by the data. But let's have a look upon what is React. Obviously, as I said, it is maintained by Meta, and it's a community of individual developers. So it was created by Meta, but now it's been open source. Okay, we as Meta would take care of developing and giving it money so that it's beneficial for us as a company and other open source community who are using React as well. But generally, it's an open source community these days. right? So if you go to the React website, and I'll obviously be changing it to night mode. So it says we are a library for web and native user interfaces. Now earlier it was basically for web, and then React Native came, which is basically for the web develop. Oh, sorry, app development for your mobile apps like iOS and Android and so on, so on. But particularly, what is React? React is an open source framework for JavaScript. So basically, it enables JavaScript to do more, and but in an organized way. That's what we'll kind of learn here. Now, if you look here, obviously, if we had to create this particular tag or this particular kind of UI, so we had to use a lot of HTML, we had to use a lot of CSS, we had to use image, paragraph tag, so on, right? But with React, your kind of code would look somewhat like this. So it's very short code. Now, obviously, all of these things are defined elsewhere. So these are basically, your code is much more organized, your code is much more readable, and your code majorly is broken down into smaller pieces, so it's not rendered all at once. So we'll have a look upon how this helps us. Similarly, they kind of made this, and then basically they are saying that you can reuse components. So for example, rather than writing the same piece 3 times, we are kind of using a for loop to render the same code but 3 times with different data. So yeah. So same thing example, I want you to visit this particular website. This is react.dev. It'll give you much more insight. So we've already talked about this one. If you look here, earlier also I was saying, earlier you had this whole website, but there are some components which are reusable. So for example, if you visit any particular website, the top menu on the website is always the same. It's always the same menu. So for example, if you visit prepinstar.com, on the top you'll always see a logo, you'll always see navigation for companies, you'll always see logout, you'll always see login, you'll always see sign up, you'll always see your profile, and so on. So it's never changing. So every time whenever you refresh the page, is it wise for me to send the code again? Why can't I only send the code to the website that requires the change? Similarly, with footer also, if you go to any footer of a website, what you'll see? You'll see all the social media links, you'll see the address of the company, you'll see terms and conditions of the company at the very bottom of the page, the different information. So it's always the same. Why would you need to send it again and again? Just kind of only send the information that's new. And again, what you can do is you can break down the code also. So rather than writing, for example, this web header, that is the header components and even the top navbar component, right? You have to write like 300, 400 lines, but you write it somewhere else. In the actual body, you just give web header, and this web header would look for in another file wherever those 300, 400 lines are. So in your page, your code would look more organized, even though it has to visit somewhere else for the actual code. But you can always be like, okay, you'll have to scroll down less also. So your code is kind of organized for people to read, right? Same goes here. So you're kind of breaking down the code, providing the code somewhere else, and only reloading the code that requires reloading. So that's one more thing. Now earlier, whole of your website kind of had a common CSS, kind of had a common JavaScript, kind of have a common HTML, right? Wherever all the HTML files and everything are written. Now this is unwise, right? For HTML, maybe different pages have different HTML, but for CSS, most of the websites have a common CSS, and that everything, all of the CSS has to be loaded all at once, right? So it's kind of stupid. So what React also said was that rather than these whole website having common frameworks or common properties, let's break down these website into components, and these individual components would have their individual properties, and we'll only send the properties when those individual components are required. So on some page, one particular component would not be there, I'll not send its properties. So component 1 could be a nav bar, could be a search bar, could be a video tile, could be a like button, could be Prepinsta Prime as well. So for example, if I go to prepinstaprime.com, so you'll kind of see here, there are some reusable components. So for example here, right? So this is same, this is same, this is same, this is same, this is same. This kind of looks similar. Only difference here is in terms of the heading, the button, but the layout is more or less similar, right? So I'll kind of give it the same CSS and would only load CSS. So for example, let's say if I were to visit this internal page of Prep Insta, and wherein probably let's say I log in upon it. Now here I don't need those CSS, so I'll not send it, right? Here, if you see here, this top menu is always there on all the pages. So I'll not send it again. I'll kind of keep it same. Same thing. Our footer is always the same. So I'll not send it again because let's say if I visit another page, this all would be still the same. So we'll have a talk about it a little more into DOM. So you kind of break in different components. So for example, our video tile could be one component that has an individual CSS JavaScript, which is common. And I'm only sending it as a common property rather than every time on every page I'm sending it. Okay, so this is one thing. Now, there are a few things. So for example, sometimes you need to dynamically load something on your website. So for example, let's say if I go to my Twitter, and don't judge my Twitter. So even though I scroll, as you can see, new things are being loaded. New things are basically being loaded. But all of this section kind of remains the same. So this happens with, it can happen in multiple ways, probably in classic vanilla web development also there are ways to do it, but Reacts provide good frameworks for us to be able to do all of that. So this is one way, for example, how your Instagram, how your Twitter, how your Facebook would work, right? Dynamically load the content, only the content what's needed, and the rest of the HTML, CSS, JS kind of remains the same. So we'll have a look upon it. So for example, earlier version of Facebook. Now, every time you had to check for new notifications, you had to refresh the page. Every time you had to check for new friend requests, you had to refresh the page. Every time, let's say you had to check who poked you now, you had to refresh the page. Every time you would probably click upon a button to save information, like updating your profile. For example, you could be updating your marital status. And when you click upon says, the page has to be refreshed again. So this is stupid, right? Why? So these dynamic things are also kind of happened, simplified with the help of React, right? Now the new notification just comes whenever you're using the app and kind of just appears. So let me give you an example of how this could work in your DOM tree, right? So your DOM tree would have your HTML, head, body, div, and let's say some button. Now, let's say on the click of some event of your JavaScript, that button has some change. So only that particular HTML, CSS, and JS, because that component has changed. So only that particular HTML, CSS, JavaScript would now be re-rendered by looking at the server that how do I need to render them? Tell me the rules. So I'll give you an example here. So for example, earlier, this was Arpit had sent you a friend request. Now, if you click upon accept, obviously some things needs to be changed. So rather than refreshing the page and sending all the new information all over again, every else of the thing kind of remains the same. Only since there's a change in that button, so here in that component or here in that div DOM, wherever that button is, so you'll be like, okay, the rest of the Facebook remains the same, and it says, congratulations, you and Arpit are now friends, and then view profile and all of that comes. So you're not re-rendering the whole page, you're re-rendering a few selective components based upon changes in a specific area of the DOM tree. So this is how your React would work. What we are going to do is in the next video, we'll learn a few new tools, and probably in the next video, we'll probably be start coding. So thank you. I'll see you up ahead in the next video. Thank you.